So let's talk about net zero in the UK for a moment. I just interviewed Kemi Badenoch, who's the new leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, for everybody who's watching and listening. And she noted her resistance to net zero when it was initially formulated, but she also pointed out, and I don't even know how to conceptualize this, and remain out of the domain of radical conspiracy theory. She pointed out, kind of like Keir Starmer when he talked about the fact that this experiment in mass migration was something that was perpetrated from the top down consciously, and that everyone who opposed it was gaslit, and that was also conscious, and oops, we're sorry about that. But Badenoch said that something approximating $1 trillion cost net zero plan was passed through Westminster with 20 minutes of debate. It's like, so I just don't know how to conceptualize this. It's like, first of all, what were the Conservatives thinking? Like, what was their motivation? Was it merely that they were trying to look like planetary saviors and to virtue signal despite the fact that they were Conservatives? Or like, or was it the fact that, like Keir Starmer, they were completely enamored of the Davos WF crowd, which they regarded as like somehow more stylish than, the mere plodding pedestrians in the Parliament?
Well, you're answering your own questions in a way, Jordan, because the answer is they're not Conservatives. What has happened to the Conservative Party, one of the oldest, most successful parties in the history of democracy, is that it has completely abandoned its ideological roots. It's become a liberal party. The vast majority of MPs in Parliament, Conservative MPs, are essentially liberal MPs. They are the ones that put mass immigration on steroids. They are the ones that put net zero on steroids. They are the ones that put gender ideology on steroids. And Kemi Badenoch is claiming that she is, the party has learned its lessons, that she's going to change direction. But in reality, because of the structure of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, because it is dominated from top to bottom by liberals, even if Kemi Badenoch believes in what she's saying, she knows deep down she will not be able to fundamentally change the direction of travel. So what I think we need is a bit like what America has witnessed over the last 10 years, which is a complete replacement of not just the Tory party, but the dominant establishment in this country, which is clinging to a consensus that is fundamentally out of touch with what voters want. I mean, mass immigration, I'll give you one example, Jordan. We can come back and talk a little bit about net zero, but to me, mass uncontrolled immigration has fundamentally weakened Great Britain. It has undermined our prosperity. It has divided our society. Nobody ever voted for it. Boris Johnson did the opposite of what he promised voters he would do when he was elected in 2019. He said he'd lower immigration. He'd put it on steroids. 86% of all migration into Britain is now coming from outside Europe, from what I would argue are culturally incompatible nations. They're more impoverished nations. And the evidence that we now have from various government bodies that are now finally admitting that actually this is a net fiscal cost to the UK taxpayer. Before you get to things like the rape gangs, before you get to things like Islamist terrorism, before you get to things like sectarianism on the streets of Britain that we've seen since the 7th of October, just at an economic level, this doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Yet it was imposed on everybody by both the established left and the established right. So my theory of British politics here is that the voter backlash to mass immigration is going to be the new Brexit. This is going to be a major fault line in our politics. And the Tories, the status conscious Tories, and you're right, Jordan, because they are more interested in winning social status from London liberals, from the luxury belief class, from what Rob Henderson and others have talked about. They are more interested in accruing social status from the London bubble than they are at saving this country. And that is a reality about the Tory party. They've completely sold this country down the river. In fact, one minor example that I think will give international viewers a real sense of what I would argue is a betrayal. It was the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson when it was in office that even removed a requirement for companies in Britain to advertise jobs in Britain before they advertised them overseas. They didn't even prioritize British workers within this national economy. They just completely opened the floodgates. And the end result is what you see around us today, which is zero growth, massive amounts of debt, no productivity, declining GDP per capita, while we're also pursuing this net zero madness, closing steel factories across northern England in order to deal with this political vanity project for an elite class that doesn't apparently seem to care about anybody else in this country. So I'm deeply worried about the direction of travel, but the Tory party is not going to change the direction of travel. You know, if an architect demolished your house, you wouldn't invite the architect back to do it again, would you? And I think in the same way, you know, it was the Tories that really demolished Britain. So why on earth would you invite them back to have another go? I think we need wholesale political change.